Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you a DIY step-by-step tutorial on my latest photo book, a Japanese step-bound book. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and make sure to check the notifications bell to never miss a new video. In my previous video a week ago, I showed this book, the insides of it, and just a general page through so you can see how it looks. And in that video, I promised to show the entire process of how I created the book from the design stage all the way to the binding and finishing off. So if you want to see the insides of the book, you can click on the link below. And in this video, it's quite a long video again, so I'm going to put some timestamps in so you can skip to the parts that interest you the most. I'm going to start with the design process, then the printing process, the assembly process and stitching process, and the final sleeve. Let's dive in. So let me just say a few words about the design. I made this photo book in Affinity Publisher. As you know me, that's my preferred choice for editing books and photo books. So I set up my page as an A4 page, and I added a little bit of bleed on the three sides. I didn't add any bleed on the left side because that's the binding side, so I don't need any bleed there. In this book, I decided not to use any full bleed images, so nothing is going to go all around to the bleed, but I just like to add my bleeds anyway, because you'll see that there is a little bit of graphic going all the way to the bleed in the master page. Here, the blue line shows my margins. I've got 1 inch on every side and 2 inches on the left side because the Japanese stab binding is quite wide. I think it's 1 inch for the binding, and then you need another inch to make the graphics or the artwork look centered. So that's all about the setup of the document. I've only used one master page in this photo book design, and you can see it here. I've got 4 things on the master page that I wanted to have on every single page. If you don't know what a master page is, it's basically a template that you can use throughout the project. And if you make any changes to this template, it's automatically going to update the entire book. So it's a huge time saver, and it makes your book look more neat and more organized. So what I've got here is Japan in Japanese at the top, 2013, and you can see this red line which goes all the way into the bleed, and this is why I set up the bleed, because I want to make sure that this goes all the way to the edge of the page. Of course, if you do anything like that, you have to print borderless. If you can't do that with your printer, then don't use a full bleed design on your book. On the side here, I've got the name of the city in Japanese again. So this one says Tokyo. In the bottom, I inserted a page number. And here on the left side, I have my day number and the little box around, again, that goes into the bleed. And that's all about my master page. I've got a few maps that I designed here apart from the map base. So I inserted the map base, and then I added some titles, cities and path and a little plane. If you want to get any of these maps for your photo books, you can go onto my website, travelmapcreator.com, and you can choose the elegant minimalist style to get something like this. Then here is a little introduction, and as you've seen in the video, here I've got vellum paper. Now I put the vellum paper and the standard paper onto the same sheet here because if I create another page for the vellum paper, it's going to add a new page number for that. So I just wanted to see how it's going to look. So the top layer is what goes onto my vellum paper, this, and if I untick those, this is my standard paper. So when I print out the book, I just disable the vellum paper, and when I print the vellum papers, I'm going to disable the standard paper design and just print the vellum paper design on the vellum paper. I hope that makes sense. And as you can see, I disabled the master page for this page because I just wanted the Tokyo graphics on it, nothing else. There's another map, as you can see, a little bit different. It's a city map this time, but the same kind of grey minimalist look. And then here are the designs for the pages. as I talked about this in my previous video, just a random layout of the photos, some text, and I've got here Athelis for the titles, Avenir for the subtitles, and just a little red dot to symbolize the Japanese flag. I've got these random rectangles, which are just basically rectangles, and I just put them around the photos to add some geometric shape to the photo book. And that's basically all about it. The rest of the book follows the exact same pattern, and I've got a few more vellum sheets, and let me just show you. Here is a little bit different. This vellum sheet has some cherry blossoms to add a little bit of color, and again I'm going to print this on the vellum sheet, and then I'm going to disable those and print these in the standard photo book. So to create my cover, I came to Photoshop. It just gives me a little bit more flexibility for single pages. And here you can see the mock-up of my entire cover. So that shows the texture of the paper, the stitching, and all the elements I want to have on my cover. Now, obviously, when I print my cover, I'm going to print it on this linen textured stock, and the only things that go onto the linen textured stock are the text and the cherry blossom. So I'm going to disable all of the other things that I don't need, and this is basically what I'm going to print borderless on my linen textured sheet. And once I printed out this sheet, I'm going to export my Japanese country shape into a separate PNG file and use that in my Cricut machine to cut out the shape on the already printed linen textured sheet. So first I print and then I cut out the shape. You can obviously do it the other way around, but once you cut out these intricate shapes onto the paper, it might cause some jam in the printer when you try to print on it. Now, what you can also see on this mock-up is the mock-up of the actual stitching. I think it's a great idea to create a mock-up of the stitching because you want to see how it's going to look, and you can also do a little bit of cheating. So what I did here is I basically mapped out the points where the needle needs to go in by putting little dots, and I'm going to print these little dots also on my front cover, and that's going to be my guide for piercing the sheets and the entire book. And that's really all about my cover. This photo here behind the cutout shape is going to be the first page in the book, so you'll see it through the die cut shape in the cover. Now let's move on to the printing process. First, I'm going to make my cover, so I'm going to print out my cover on a textured, linen textured paper, and I'm also going to put this through my Cricut machine to cut out the shape of Japan, because this is going to show a picture behind, almost like a die cut window, but it's not a square, it's the shape of the country. After printing out my cover, I'm going to print out the inner pages. This one is extremely simple because I'm doing one side only, so it's not double-sided, it's just one side, the front side. So the printing process takes a long time, as you know. I think this book is 40 pages, it's not even that long, but it still takes quite a long time to print it out, so I'm going to speed it up. And for this, I'm using a 130 GSM matte smooth paper. It's quite thin, and I wouldn't normally use anything like this for a photo book because it can feel a little bit too thin, but because in this book I'm only using one-sided printing, it's okay. And since the Japanese binding, the stab binding, doesn't allow the book to open fully, the thicker the paper, the harder it's going to be to page the book. So the thinner papers work much better in these Japanese style books. Now that all my pages are printed, I have to assemble the book. So as you can see, I printed some images or graphics on vellum paper as well. This is a fairly transparent paper. I've used it in my previous books as well. It just adds a little bit of dimension and texture to the book. It makes it look more elegant, and I really like how it looks. So I'm going to put these in order, put them inside the book. I'm going to put the covers on. So I'm using a red card on the front and the back as well. Not just for the color, but also to add a little bit more rigidity since the front cover is not so thick. And after that red sheet at the front, I'm going to add my sheet of paper which has the photo that's going to show through the map window. And finally, I'm going to put on the cover on the top. I'm going to do the same on the back, so one red sheet, and then the linen textured paper goes on the back as well. Now we have to start piercing the holes in the book. Now in my previous videos I've done this with an awl, but in this project I'm using a drill. I've seen many people do it and I said I'm going to try it as well. So what I did is I clamped the book between two boards just to make sure the pages don't move when I'm drilling. So once I clamped my pages in the book, I'm going to put them elevated a little bit. So I put some books on the one side and I put some hollow cardboard on the other side underneath the book. So when I drill into it, it's not going to go into my desk. So important here is to use the right size for drilling. I've used the thinnest one that I have, but as you'll see later on when I start stitching, that it's actually a little bit too small. So I struggled. I should have used a slightly bigger one. It just depends on the thread as well. So this was nice and easy. As you can see, it worked really well, and I would suggest you do that too if you have a drill at home. Now let's move on to the stitching process. I'm using a black thread for this one and it's waxed. Waxing a thread or buying a waxed thread is a big plus because it's going to slide better inside the holes in the paper. It's not going to get tangled and stuck so easily. And I'm using a needle, just a regular sewing needle for it. Now there's so many patterns that you can use for Japanese step binding. There are lots of tutorials for all of them, lots of different patterns and looks. I wanted to go for this one as this is the one I like the most and it doesn't seem too complicated. However, in my case, I didn't want to follow a tutorial. I didn't want to follow a pattern. I wanted to go by feel, and it works. It might not work the first time, but it definitely works. You just have to figure out the logic behind. I usually start somewhere in the middle and I'm going to put the needle through from the back. Now, many people do this from the middle of the book to kind of conceal the final knot. I'm not so bothered about that and I think it looks fine. So I'm just going to go in through the back. And then as you can see, you can follow the pattern I'm doing. I'm going to loop back first around the spine and come back and then carry on, loop back, carry on, loop back. And then once I'm back at the middle, I'm going to go to the other side, come back. And if I did everything correctly, I should be going through each side just once and the two threads should be meeting at the very end. As you can see in the video, I struggled a little bit to pull through the needle. I was helping with my awl to push out the needle on the other side and to make the holes a little bit bigger. And once I'm finished with the stitching, I'm going to tie a few knots. Make sure it's very tight all the way through because it looks quite ugly when it's not tight, and also the book might come loose and you don't want that. And the book is done. I can page through and it stays nice and strong. The final thing I'm going to do is a sleeve for the book. As you could see, when I cut out the shape of Japan, there were quite some intricate detail and very thin bits of paper. And when you handle the book, those can easily rip or get damaged. So what I've done is I printed out this sheet on an A3 plus paper, and I'm just going to put the Japanese flag in the middle. I'm going to make it 15 centimeters and it's going to cover the cutout country shape on the front. So once I got it out, I'm going to use my bone folder to shape it around the book, and on the back I'm going to use just some regular stick glue and stick it together. Make sure that it slides down and it slides up. It's a little bit tight, but I think it's better to make it tight than too loose because it looks nicer when it's tight. And now the book is ready. I hope you liked my tutorial on Japanese step binding. I really love this book. I love how it turned out. It's very pretty and it's exactly what I wanted, and it was so much easier to do than a case-bound book. If you want me to do more in-depth tutorials on step binding, the actual pattern slowed down and showing each step, or actually showing charts, then let me know in the comments. I would be happy to do a few of those videos as well. If you have any questions about this process, leave it in the comments and let me know if you liked this book and this tutorial by giving me a thumbs up. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, subscribe for more.